Hello, story lovers. Tonight, we're diving into a tale of passion, secrets, and choices that could change everything. Hearts will be broken, love will be tested, and every twist will leave you on the edge of your seat. Comment below where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, hit like, subscribe. Share it with someone who loves a powerful love story. And tap the bell so you never miss the next thrilling chapter. Ready? Let's begin. Asterisk, the 42nd floor of Blackwood. Tower breathed with the weight of silence at 3 a.m. Floor 2 ceiling windows framed a city that pulsed with neon veins. While Julian Blackwood sat imprisoned behind mahogany and leather, his empire spreading endlessly below him like a kingdom he no longer wanted to rule. At 32, he commanded billions, but couldn't command sleep. His fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced emptiness, reviewing reports that mattered to everyone except him. The past month had carved hollows beneath his eyes. Ever since the phone call that shattered his carefully constructed world, Tommy, 8 years old, orphaned, his responsibility now, the soft hum of wheels on marble broke through his mental prison. Julian's head snapped up, his body tensing with the paranoia that came with having too much to lose. The cleaning crew wasn't due until 4 a.m. He pressed his ear to the office door, and through the cold wood came something unexpected. Humming. Not the mechanical drone of someone marking time, but a melody that carried actual joy. Cracking the door, Julian peered into the hallway and saw her. Rosalie Hart moved like water through the sterile corporate landscape, her blue uniform somehow failing to diminish the light that seemed to radiate from her movements. She polished each surface with the kind of care most people reserved for precious things, humming a tune that transformed the empty hallway into something almost sacred. At 24, Rosalie had learned to find magic in the mundane. Every brass fixture she polished reflected not just light but possibilities. Behind every office door lived someone's dreams. And even in the loneliest hours, she carried hope like a flame that refused to be extinguished. Tonight, as she worked toward the executive floor, she noticed the corner office blazing with light. In 3 years of cleaning this building, she had never seen anyone working this late. Concern flickered through her chest. Whoever was inside must be carrying weight too heavy for normal daylight hours. She knocked softly on the doorframe before entering, her cleaning supplies barely making a whisper against the thick carpet. The office was magnificent and cold, all rich wood and expensive art that screamed of success, achieved at the cost of warmth. But the man behind the desk drew her attention like a magnet. His dark hair disheveled, his $1,000 shirt wrinkled from hours of internal warfare. Julian looked up, startled by the intrusion. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other across the chasm of their different worlds. "I'm sorry," Rosalie said, her voice carrying a warmth that Julian hadn't heard in years. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I can come back later." Julian found himself studying her face, searching for the hidden agenda that never came. When was the last time someone had looked at him without wanting something in return? "It's fine," he replied, his voice rougher than intended. "I was just finishing up." But Rosalie could see the lie written in the tension of his shoulders, in the exhaustion carved around his eyes like battle scars. Without thinking, she set down her supplies and moved closer. "You look like you haven't slept in days. Is everything all right?" The question hit Julian like a physical blow. In his world of corporate sharks and social climbers, personal concern was a weapon, not a gift. But something in her tone suggested she actually cared about the answer. "Just work," he said, then found himself adding, "It's been a difficult month." Rosalie nodded with understanding that felt like absolution. "My grandmother used to say that the hardest times often come right before the most beautiful changes." Julian almost smiled. "Your grandmother sounds like she was wise. She taught me that every person we meet is fighting battles we know nothing about. That's why kindness matters." As Rosalie began cleaning around his desk, Julian watched her work with fascination. She moved with an almost meditative grace, treating each surface with respect that bordered on reverence. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight in his chest began to ease. Then Rosalie noticed the photograph partially hidden behind a stack of papers. Julian with a young boy, both laughing at something beyond the camera's reach. It was the first genuine smile she had seen on his face. even captured in silver and glass. "He looks like you," she commented gently. Julian's expression immediately darkened. "That's my nephew Tommy. His parents died in a car accident last month. The courts are deciding where he should live permanently." The raw pain in his voice made Rosalie's heart ache. "How is he adjusting?" "He's not," Julian admitted. "He barely speaks to me. I can run a multi-billion-dollar company, but I can't figure out how to help an 80-year-old boy who has lost everything." Rosalie saw through his polished exterior to the man drowning beneath. Children don't need perfect guardians. They need people who care enough to try. The fact that you're worried about doing right by him tells me you're already on the right path. How do you know about children? I have 5 younger siblings. I practically raised them while my mother worked 3 jobs. Children can sense when someone genuinely cares, even if that person doesn't have all the answers. For the first time in weeks, Julian felt something dangerously close to hope. As Rosalie prepared to leave, Julian found himself desperate to extend this unexpected moment of peace. "What's your name?" "Rosalie," she replied, pausing at the doorway. "Rosalie Hart." "Julian," he said, though they both knew she already knew who he was. "It was nice meeting you, Julian. I hope things get easier with your nephew." As she disappeared into the hallway, Julian stared at the empty doorway and realized something had fundamentally shifted in his carefully controlled world. This woman, this stranger who cleaned his building in the darkness, had offered him more comfort than years of expensive therapy. But what he didn't know was that Rosalie's heart was carrying secrets of her own. Secrets that would soon turn their unlikely connection into something far more dangerous than either of them could imagine. 3 nights later, Julian found himself staying late deliberately, something he would have called impossible a week ago. The excuse was always work, but the truth sat heavier in his chest. He was waiting for her. When the soft humming echoed through the hallway at 3:15 a.m., his pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or board meetings. "You're here late again," Rosalie observed as she entered his office, but her tone carried warmth instead of judgment. "So are you," Julian replied, closing his laptop with more eagerness than he cared to admit. "I don't have much choice. Extra shifts help me save for my bakery." She began dusting his bookshelf with the same careful attention she gave everything else. "What's your excuse?" Julian hesitated. Honesty was a luxury he had abandoned years ago, but something about the darkness in her presence made truth feel safer. "I've been thinking about what you said. About Tommy, and I took him to the park yesterday. He didn't say much, but he didn't run away either. That felt like progress." Rosalie turned from her dusting, a genuine smile lighting her face. "That's huge progress. What did you 2 do?" "Mostly sat on a bench while he fed ducks. But he asked me if I knew his favorite story. I didn't, but I said I'd like to learn it." "What happened then?" Julian's expression softened with memory. "He started telling me about dragons and knights, and for maybe 10 minutes, he forgot to be angry with the world." "You're learning," Rosalie said, her voice filled with something that sounded dangerously close to pride. Their conversations became a ritual. Night after night, Julian found reasons to stay late, and Rosalie found herself lingering longer in his office than any cleaning required. They talked about Tommy, about her bakery dreams, about everything except the growing electric tension that sparked whenever their hands accidentally brushed. 2 weeks into their midnight meetings, Julian made a decision that surprised them both. "Would you like to meet him?" "Tommy, I mean?" Rosalie paused in her cleaning, mop handle frozen in her grip. "Are you sure that's wise? He needs to see that not all adults in his life are going to disappear. And honestly, you understand children better than anyone I know." The next Saturday afternoon, Rosalie found herself in Julian's penthouse apartment, a space that screamed of expensive loneliness. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, but the rooms felt more like a museum than a home. Tommy sat curled in an oversized leather chair, a picture book clutched to his chest like armor. He was smaller than Rosalie had expected, all dark eyes and guarded expressions that mirrored his uncle's protective walls. "Tommy," Julian said carefully, "I'd like you to meet my friend Rosalie." The boy looked up with the kind of skepticism that belonged on much older faces. "Uncle Julian doesn't have friends," Rosalie laughed, the sound surprising all three of them. You know what? You're absolutely right. Your uncle is terrible at making friends. Lucky for both of us, I'm excellent at it. She sat cross-legged on the floor near Tommy's chair, making herself smaller, less threatening. What's the story you're reading? It's about a dragon who's sad because everyone's afraid of him, but he just wants someone to talk to. Dragons get lonely too, Rosalie said thoughtfully. Just like uncles. Just like 8-year-old boys who miss their parents. Tommy's grip on the book tightened. Do you miss your parents? Every day. They died when I was 16. But missing them doesn't mean I can't be happy again. It just means they were important enough to miss. Julian watched from across the room as Tommy slowly uncurled from his protective position, drawn by Rosalie's gentle honesty. Could you read with me? Tommy asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'd love to. As Rosalie settled beside Tommy on the massive couch, Julian felt something crack open in his chest. Watching them together, her dark head bent close to Tommy's smaller one. He realized he was witnessing something precious and terrifying, the possibility of family. Over the following weeks, their unusual triangle began to form the shape of something real. Julian started coming home earlier, drawn by the sound of Rosalie's laughter, mixing with Tommy's rare moments of joy. She began staying for dinner after her day shift at the cleaning company, teaching Tommy to bake simple cookies while Julian attempted to help and mostly got in the way. You're different with them, his assistant Marcus observed one Thursday afternoon. Lighter, Julian didn't deny it. He couldn't. For the first time in his adult life, he looked forward to going home. But their growing happiness was built on foundations neither of them fully understood. One evening, as Rosalie helped Tommy with homework while Julian finished conference calls in his study, she received a phone call that drained the color from her face. I have to go, she said abruptly, gathering her things with shaking hands. What's wrong? Julian emerged from his study, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere. Family emergency. I'm sorry I can't explain right now. She kissed Tommy's forehead and headed for the door. But Julian caught her arm gently. Rosalie, whatever it is, I can help. You don't have to face it alone. For a moment, her mask slipped, and he saw something that looked like fear mixed with guilt. Some things can't be fixed with money, Julian. Some debts can't be paid that way. She left without another word, leaving Julian staring at the closed door with the growing certainty that their carefully built world was about to come crashing down. What he didn't know was that the phone call had come from Vincent Torres, a man from Rosalie's past who specialized in making problems disappear for the right price. A man who had just made Julian Blackwood his next target, with Rosalie as his unwitting weapon. The game had begun, and none of them knew the rules. Rosalie didn't return for 3 days. Julian found himself checking his phone obsessively, pacing his office like a caged animal, snapping at assistants who had done nothing wrong. Tommy asked about her constantly, his fragile progress threatening to unravel with each passing hour. Maybe she decided she doesn't like us anymore, Tommy said quietly on the third night. Curled up in Julian's lap as they watched a movie neither of them was really seeing. She likes us, Julian said with more confidence than he felt. Sometimes adults have complicated problems that take time to solve. Like when you have to work late because of bad people trying to hurt your company. Julian's blood chilled. What do you know about that? I heard you on the phone. Someone's trying to buy your company and you don't want them to? Are they the bad people? Before Julian could answer, the building's security called up. Rosalie was in the lobby, asking to see him. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually bright eyes were shadowed with something that looked like grief, and her hands shook as she accepted the cup of coffee Julian pressed into her. Palms, I owe you an explanation, she began. But Tommy launched himself at her before she could continue. You came back. Uncle Julian said you would, but I was scared you wouldn't. Rosalie held him tight, her eyes closing as if she could memorize the moment. I promised I'd help you learn to make bread, didn't I? I keep my promises. But Julian could see the pain written in the lines around her eyes. After Tommy went to bed, she finally told him the truth. My brother Danny got involved with some dangerous people when he was younger. Made some very bad choices. I thought that was all behind us, but 3 days ago, Vincent Torres called me. Julian's blood turned to ice. He knew that name. Vincent Torres ran one of the most sophisticated corporate espionage operations on the East Coast, specializing in hostile takeovers and industrial sabotage. What did he want? Information about you. Your routines, your weaknesses, your personal life. He said Danny still owed him money, and this would clear the debt. The betrayal hit Julian like a physical blow. And you said yes? I said no. Rosalie's voice cracked. I told him I wouldn't hurt you or Tommy, but Julian. He has photos of Danny with his children, my niece and nephew. He made it very clear what would happen if I didn't cooperate. Julian stood and walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. The city spread below them, beautiful and merciless. How long have you been feeding him information? I haven't given him anything. That's why I disappeared. I've been trying to figure out how to protect everyone I care about. But there's no good answer. Julian turned back to her, his face a mask of cold control. There's always an answer. The question is what you're willing to sacrifice to find it. I won't. Sacrifice you or Tommy, then you'll sacrifice your brother's children. The question hung between them like a blade. Rosalie's face crumpled. And Julian realized he was witnessing someone being torn apart by impossible choices. I have money, Julian said finally. I can pay off whatever Danny owes, relocate your family somewhere safe. Vincent doesn't want money. He wants your company. He's been planning this hostile takeover for months, and having someone on the inside was his final piece. Without me, he'll find another way. But it will take longer and cost him more. Julian's mind raced through possibilities and angles, weighing options like chess moves. What exactly does he want from you? Your security codes? Your meeting schedules? Details about the board members who might be willing to sell their shares? Rosalie's voice was barely above a whisper. He wants me to plant listening devices in your home and office, and if you refuse, he'll hurt innocent children to make a point. Julian was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the city that had made him wealthy but never happy. When he turned back to Rosalie, his expression was unreadable. Give him what he wants, Julian. No, not the real information. We're going to feed him carefully crafted lies while I work. Behind the scenes, to destroy him completely, Rosalie stared at him, recognizing something dangerous in his voice. This was Julian Blackwood, the corporate predator. The man who had built an empire by being more ruthless than his enemies. You want to use me as bait. I want to save your family and destroy the man threatening them. But it means you'll have to lie to him, to me, when others are watching, and to yourself. Can you do that? Rosalie thought of her niece's laugh, her nephew's gap-toothed smile, Danny's desperate attempts to rebuild his life. What about Tommy? He's finally starting to heal. Tommy will be fine as long as Vincent Torres never learns he exists, and us. What happens to us? Julian's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the pain beneath. That depends on whether you can forgive me for what I'm about to ask you to do. Over the next 2 weeks, Julian orchestrated an elaborate deception. Rosalie fed Torres carefully constructed intelligence designed to lead him into a trap. While Julian mobilized resources Torres couldn't imagine existed, private investigators, federal contacts, financial forensics experts who specialized in dismantling criminal operations. But the plan required Rosalie to play the role of reluctant spy, which meant pulling away from Julian and Tommy just as their fragile family was beginning to solidify. She had to appear conflicted, guilty, desperate, all while secretly working to bring down the man threatening the people she loved. The performance was flawless and devastating. Tommy withdrew again, confused by Rosalie's sudden distance. Julian maintained his cold corporate mask even as he watched the woman he had fallen in love with pretend to betray him. The breaking point came on a Friday night. Torres demanded a meeting, wanting to verify that his inside information was accurate. Julian insisted on planting a wire on Rosalie. Knowing it was their best chance to gather evidence that would end Torres permanently, he'll search me, Rosalie protested. If he finds a wire, he'll know everything. He won't find it, Julian said grimly. Because you're not wearing it. You're swallowing it. Rosalie stared at him, realizing the full extent of what he was asking. The device was experimental, potentially dangerous, and would require her to trust him completely with her life. "If something goes wrong," she whispered, "promise me you'll take care of Tommy. Don't let him think I abandoned him again." Julian cupped her face in his hands, his control finally cracking. "Nothing is going to happen to you. I won't let it. You can't promise that. I can promise that I love you. Both of you. And I'll burn down half the city before I let Torres hurt my family." It was the first time either of them had said the word love, and it hung between them like a confession and a prayer, as Rosalie prepared to walk into the most dangerous meeting of her life. Neither of them knew that Vincent Torres had already discovered their deception. He was waiting for her with a trap of his own, one that would force Julian to make an impossible choice between the woman he loved and the nephew who depended on him. The endgame was about to begin, and someone wouldn't survive it. The warehouse on the east side reeked of rust and broken dreams. Rosalie entered alone, the experimental recording device, a cold weight in her stomach, knowing that Julian was monitoring every word from a van 3 blocks away. Vincent Torres was nothing like she had expected. Instead of the obvious criminal she had imagined, he was a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, someone who could blend into any corporate boardroom. His smile was warm and fatherly, which made him infinitely more terrifying. "Miss Hart, thank you for coming. I trust you've been thinking about our arrangement." "I brought what you asked for," Rosalie said, pulling a flash drive from her jacket. "Julian's security protocols, meeting schedules for the next month, and the personal information you wanted." Torres accepted the drive with a pleased expression, and the listening devices. Installed in his home office and bedroom, you should be able to monitor all his private conversations. What Torres didn't know was that the flash drive contained carefully crafted misinformation designed to lead his people into Julian's trap. The listening devices were real but fed into Julian's own security system, allowing him to control what Torres heard. "Excellent. Your brother's debt is almost cleared, Miss Hart. Just one more task." Rosalie's blood chilled. "You said this would finish it." "Plans change. Mr. Blackwood has proven more resilient than anticipated. He's been asking questions about me, mobilizing resources I'd prefer remain dormant. I need him distracted." "What kind of distracted?" Torres pulled out a tablet and showed her a photograph that made her knees buckle. Tommy, walking out of his school, unaware of the camera capturing his innocent smile. "Beautiful boy. Looks just like his uncle." "You leave him alone," Rosalie snarled, all pretense of cooperation vanishing. "He's a child. He has nothing to do with this. He has everything to do with this. He's Julian Blackwood's only weakness. And now, thanks to your excellent intelligence gathering, I know exactly how to exploit that weakness in the surveillance van." Julian heard every word and felt his world tilt sideways. The trap they had so carefully laid was about to become their prison. Torres smiled that terrible fatherly smile. "Here's what's going to happen, Miss Hart. Tomorrow night you're going to drug Mr. Blackwood's evening coffee. Nothing dangerous, just something to ensure he sleeps deeply. While he's unconscious, my associates will collect the boy. I won't do it. Then both the boy and your brother's children will disappear permanently." Rosalie's voice broke. "Please, take me instead. Leave the children out of this. Children make better leverage. Adults have a tendency to do unpredictable things when they're desperate." Torres pocketed the tablet. "You have 18 hours to decide, Miss Hart. Choose wisely." As Rosalie left the warehouse, her legs barely carrying her, Julian was already moving. The van screeched through city streets as he coordinated with federal agents, private security, and every resource he could mobilize. But Torres was right about one thing. He had been planning this for months. His network ran deeper than Julian had realized. "We can protect Tommy," Agent Sarah Chen assured Julian as they raced back to his building. "Safe house, federal protection, new identities if necessary. He's 8 years old," Julian said through gritted teeth. "He's already lost his parents. I won't make him lose his entire life too." "Then we end this tonight," Chen replied. Torres made one mistake. He assumed Rosalie would fold under pressure, but when they reached Julian's penthouse, they found it empty. Tommy was gone, and there was no sign of a struggle. Julian's phone rang immediately. "Mr. Blackwood," Torres's voice was silk over steel. "I trust you're having a pleasant evening." "Where is he?" "Safe. For now. But his continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. You see, Miss Hart wasn't the only one playing a double game. I've known about your little deception from the beginning." Julian's blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" "Tomorrow morning, you will call an emergency board meeting. You will announce that you've received an offer to purchase Blackwood Industries, and you will recommend that the board accept. The offer will come from one of my shell companies, naturally, and if I refuse, then young Tommy will learn what it feels like to be truly alone in the world." The line went dead, leaving Julian staring at his phone with the terrible understanding that he had been outplayed from the beginning. Agent Chen was already coordinating search teams. "We'll find him, Julian." Torres can't hide forever, but Julian knew better. Torres had been planning this move for months, probably years. He would have safe houses, escape routes, contingency plans that even federal resources might not be able to crack in time. Rosalie arrived 20 minutes later, her face streaked with tears and rage. "I told him no," she said immediately. "I swear to you, I told him I wouldn't drug you, I know." Julian pulled her into his arms, feeling her shake against his chest. "This isn't your fault. It is my fault. All of it. If I had never taken that job, if I had never met you, Tommy would be safe right now. If you had never met me, I would still be a bitter man with no idea how to love anyone. Tommy would still be an angry little boy with no hope of healing. We would both be lost." Agent Chen approached them carefully. "We have teams searching every property connected to Torres. But it's going to take time. Time we don't have," Julian said grimly. "There might be another way," Rosalie said quietly. "Torres thinks I'm cooperating. He doesn't know you've discovered his real plan. If I can get close to him again, pretend I'm still following orders, ... double quotes, absolutely not." Julian cut her off. "I won't use you as bait again. I won't lose you too. You won't lose me. But Julian, Tommy, is just a baby. He's scared and alone and probably wondering why the adults who promised to protect him have let him down again." Julian closed his eyes, seeing Tommy's small face, remembering the trust that had slowly grown between them over the past months. The boy who had lost everything and was finally beginning to believe in safety again. "There's something else," Rosalie continued. "Torres mentioned that this was about more than just your company. He said you'd been asking questions that made important people nervous. What did he mean?" Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of secrets he'd carried alone. 6 months ago, I stumbled across some financial irregularities. Companies that didn't exist, money flowing through channels that made no sense. I started investigating, thinking it was simple corporate fraud. But it wasn't. It was money laundering on a massive scale. Millions of dollars flowing from legitimate businesses into criminal enterprises. Torres isn't just a corporate spy, Rosalie. He's the financial backbone of a network that includes human trafficking, drug distribution, political corruption. Agent Chen looked up from her phone with grim satisfaction. That explains why federal resources have been so limited. Some of those political connections run very deep, which means, Julian concluded with terrible clarity, that even if we save Tommy tonight, we'll never be safe. Not unless we destroy the entire network. Or, Rosalie said quietly, unless they think they've won. Both Julian and Agent Chen turned to stare at her, recognizing something dangerous in her tone. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked. "I'm thinking that Vincent Torres believes he holds all the cards. But he's forgotten that the best way to destroy a spider is to let it think it's caught you in its web right before you burn the whole thing down." Julian realized that the woman he had fallen in love with was far more dangerous than either of them had imagined, and their only chance of saving Tommy and themselves was to bet everything on a plan that would either destroy their enemies completely or get them all killed in the attempt. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m., by 8:30. Julian sat alone in the Blackwood Industries conference room, staring at documents that would sign away everything he had built over the past decade. Agent Chen and her team were positioned throughout the building. But Torres had made it clear, any sign of law enforcement interference and Tommy would disappear forever. Julian's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. A photo of Tommy asleep on an unfamiliar couch, looking small and vulnerable. The message was clear. He was alive, but only as long as Julian cooperated. The board members filed in with the grim expressions of people attending a funeral. Marcus, his assistant for 8 years, looked like he might actually be sick. None of them understood why Julian was voluntarily destroying everything they had worked to build. "Before we begin," Julian announced, "I want to say that this decision hasn't been made lightly. Sometimes the things we value most require sacrifices that seem impossible to make." He was speaking to the room, but his words were meant for Rosalie, who he knew was listening through the surveillance system Torres believed he controlled. 3 miles away, in an abandoned textile factory, Rosalie sat zip-tied to a metal chair while Torres watched Julian's betrayal on a bank of monitors. Tommy was in the next room, still groggy from whatever they had given him, but alive and unharmed. "Your boyfriend is more sensible than I expected," Torres commented. "Most men would have chosen pride over practicality." "He's not choosing pride," Rosalie said quietly. "He's choosing love. Love is a weakness in this business, Miss Hart. It makes people predictable, does it?" Torres was so focused on Julian's surrender that he didn't notice Rosalie working, a small blade she had concealed in her sleeve, slowly cutting through the plastic restraints. She had learned the technique from her brother during his darker years, back when survival skills seemed more important than dreams of bakeries and families. On the monitors, Julian was explaining to the board why he had decided to accept the purchase offer. His voice was steady, professional, giving no hint of the rage and fear burning beneath his composed exterior. "The offer is generous," Julian continued. "And frankly, I've been considering stepping back from active management for some time. Recent events in my personal life have made me realize that some things matter more than corporate empires." Torres smiled with satisfaction, but Rosalie could see what he missed. Julian's left hand resting on the conference table, fingers positioned in a pattern that looked casual but wasn't. It was sign language, something Tommy had been teaching both of them. The message was simple: "Ready when you are." Rosalie's restraints finally gave way just as Torres's phone rang. "Sir?" A nervous voice crackled through the speaker. "We have federal agents surrounding the building." Torres spun toward the monitors, his face darkening as he realized he'd been played. On screen, Julian was no longer alone in the conference room. Agent Chen and her team had materialized from positions they must have held all along. "You clever bastard," Torres whispered, then louder, "Kill the boy." But Rosalie was already moving. The months of cleaning office buildings had kept her stronger than Torres realized. The fear for Tommy's life had made her faster than she knew she could be. She hit Torres with the full weight of her body, sending them both crashing into the bank of monitors. "Tommy, run." She screamed toward the next room as she grappled with Torres for his gun. The next minutes were chaos and violence and the terrible clarity that comes with fighting for someone you love more than your own life. Torres was stronger, but Rosalie was desperate. And desperation had made her dangerous. The gun went off twice. When federal agents finally breached the factory, they found Torres unconscious on the floor, blood streaming from a head wound where Rosalie had smashed him into the concrete. Tommy was hiding behind an overturned table, terrified but unharmed. Rosalie was slumped against the wall, her shirt dark with blood, but her eyes were clear and fierce. "Is Julian safe?" were her first words. "He's fine," Agent Chen assured her, as paramedics worked to stop the bleeding from the bullet wound in Rosalie's shoulder. Torres's entire network is rolling up as we speak. Bank accounts frozen, associates arrested, corruption exposed. It's over in Tommy. Scared but okay. He's asking for you and his uncle. Julian arrived at the hospital as Rosalie was being wheeled out of surgery. The doctor assured him the wound was clean, the surgery successful. But Julian couldn't breathe properly until he saw her eyes open. "Hey," she whispered. her voice thick with medication but warm with relief. "Hey yourself," Julian replied, taking her hand carefully. "You scared the hell out of me? Worth it? Tommy's safe. Torres is in federal custody. His entire operation is destroyed. So yes, it was worth it." Julian's voice cracked. "But don't ever do anything like that again." "I can't promise that," Rosalie said seriously. "If someone threatens our family again, I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. Our family." Despite the pain medication, Rosalie's smile was radiant. "Did you think surviving a criminal conspiracy together was going to scare me away from you too?" Julian leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "Tommy's been asking when you're coming home." "Home," Rosalie repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." 6 months later, Julian stood in the kitchen of their new house, watching Rosalie teach Tommy how to braid challah bread. The penthouse apartment had been sold, along with most of his corporate holdings. Blackwood Industries had been restructured, its leadership distributed among people Julian trusted to run it ethically. He had kept enough wealth to ensure their security. But his priorities had fundamentally shifted. The man who once measured success in stock prices now measured it in Tommy's laughter and Rosalie's flower-dusted smiles. "Uncle Julian," Tommy called out. "Rosalie says you're terrible at braiding, but you can still help if you promise not to mess it up." "I make no such promises," Julian replied, rolling up his sleeves as he joined them at the counter. Flour inevitably ending up everywhere except where it belonged. Julian realized that losing his empire had been the best thing that ever happened to him. He had traded corporate power for something infinitely more valuable, a family built on love instead of fear, trust instead of suspicion. Rosalie's bakery opened 3 months later, a warm, welcoming space that smelled of fresh bread and new beginnings. Julian helped with the business side, Tommy helped with taste testing, and together they built something beautiful and real on quiet Sunday mornings. When golden lights streamed through their kitchen windows and Tommy practiced reading recipes aloud, Julian would catch Rosalie's eye and remember that first night in his office. 2 broken people, finding each other in the darkness. Learning that love was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth rebuilding your entire life around, the lonely millionaire who trusted no one had learned to trust completely. The cleaning lady who saw beauty everywhere had taught him to see it too, and in the end, that made all the difference. The end.